Welcome to episode 214 of CppCast, the first podcast for C++ developers by C++ developers. I'm your host, Rob Irving, joined by my co-host, Jason Turner. Jason, how's it going today?
I'm all right, Rob. How are you doing?
Doing okay. It is the last week before CppCon, where lots of people will be meeting up in Denver next week. Should be fun.
Yeah, and this episode will air basically as the conference is getting started effectively, right?
Yeah, Friday right before the weekend, where some people might be going a little early to attend some of the classes, right?
Right. Yeah. Anyone who's going to one of the pre-weekend classes needs to be getting here pretty soon now.
Yeah.
Are you ready?
I'm as ready as I need to be. How about you, though? You've got a lot more to do next week compared to me.
Yeah, my week of busyness pretty much starts tonight with my local user group meeting. And then I'm hosting the field trip, as we've talked about, and 3 conference talks, and then a post-conference class. I've given 2 of the talks once before each, and the 3rd talk will be completely brand new, but fortunately that one's not until Friday.
So you still have time to work on it.
Got a little bit of time to refine it if I need to. I actually just realized last night as I was going to sleep that there was a couple of slides I needed to add to it, so I made a note to do that. Yeah.
Okay. Should be a busy week. Which one is the completely new talk?
Great C++ is trivial.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Let's see. The best parts of C++ I gave as a keynote at Core C++ in Israel this year.
Right.
And then C++ Code Smells I just gave at Industry Tech Town in Oslo last week for the first time.
Nice. How was that conference, by the way?
It was good. It was interesting because it felt like a tiny venue, but it was still several hundred people. And I don't know. I mean, it was just interesting to think this is both a big and small conference-ish at the same time. And there was the people that I knew I kept running into over and over again. And the people that I didn't know, I basically didn't see, I guess, because it's because it's a small venue, you ended up kind of choosing the areas that you like to sit and congregate in, and then you kept seeing the same people over and over again. And I didn't even realize that happened until someone else pointed out to me, I should have just gone to the other side of that wall and I would have been able to meet other people, basically.
Right. At the top of our episode, I'd like to read a piece of feedback. This week we got a tweet from Madam Young saying, I just learned about CppCast while listening to Python Bytes, which is a Python podcast. And I'm excited to check it out. Should I start at the beginning, or is there a good point at which to jump in? I thought that was pretty interesting that a Python podcast mentioned us. Not really sure about the context there.
Yeah, me neither. But I suggest that Madam Young start with episode 2.
Episode 2?
Yeah,
the first one?
My
just because you're the first episode 2?
No.
I saw one other listener suggested doing a memento style and listening to the new episodes when they come out, but continuing to go backwards in the catalog. I thought that was an interesting idea.
Except for Clickgate, I don't know if we've really changed a whole lot over the years. Presumably, we've gotten a little bit smoother.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've probably worked out a lot of issues and improved a lot compared to the first year, but then we also had a lot of really big name guests that first year,
Scott.
Yeah, Scott Myers.
Andre, did he come in the
Andre
first year?
Andrescu, I think, was in the first year.
Yeah. And then episode 100 was when we had on Bjarne, and that was 114 episodes ago.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'd love to hear your thoughts about the show. You can always reach out to us on Facebook, Twitter, or email us at feedback@cppcast.com. And don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes or subscribe on YouTube. Joining us today is Miro Knejp. Miro wrote his first line of C++ code in 1997 at the age of 12, and it has been his programming language of choice ever since. He is especially passionate about low-level programming, assembly, 3D graphics, and games engineering. Miro holds a master's degree in computer science from the Technical University of Munich. He has worked on projects ranging from designing 3D rendering libraries to building airport self-boarding control systems. He currently works as a freelancer and trainer with the goal of creating his own video game one day. Miro, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me.
All right, I feel like there's two questions I have to ask about your bio. The first is, what was your first programming language before C++?
It was a scripting language of a 3D engine that I'm not sure even exists anymore. But
So
that went away very quickly.
not like Quake
No,
script or whatever.
it was like a German engine by some guy in Germany. It was called the A4 engine, I think. That's what we found in school, but then we found OpenGL and C++ and went that way.
So you went from random, obscure, embedded scripting language to C++.
Yes.
Well, okay. And then the other thing I have to ask is self-boarding control systems. Is that like, passengers stand on a conveyor belt and we get shuffled to our seats? Because that might be a real win for boarding airplanes.
No, but that refers to the, when you board a flight, you put your boarding pass on a scanner and then it opens the door.
Yes.
Yes, so those systems, and there's a lot. They're very involved. There's a lot attached to that, and so I'm mainly working on there's a PC in there, and it controls all the attached peripherals and communicates to the airline and stuff like that.
Okay, I guess that I said yes emphatically, but that might require a little bit of background for our listeners. It's not every airport that uses that kind of thing. Oh. So yeah, you walk up to the gate and you don't have to interact with a human at all. You scan your boarding pass and then you get to walk through, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Less human interaction. It's always better, right?
Indeed.
Yeah. Okay, so Miro, we got a couple news articles to discuss. Just feel free to comment on any of these. Then we'll start talking more about the work you do and the talk you'll be giving at CppCon, okay? Oh, did we lose Miro?
Oh, maybe. Oh.
Yeah, crashed.
Hey, you're back.
Oh, okay. You're back. Don't restart Audacity or anything. Just let it keep running, okay?
Sure.
Can you say something? Where you seem to have gotten quieter. Yeah, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Something weird happened.
Audacity didn't take over.
Audacity didn't do what?
I don't know. I just restarted Skype. I didn't change anything.
It sounds like Skype is picking up a different microphone if I were to guess. Like if you have one built into your laptop or something. Because they're almost silent.
Ooh. Is it better now?
Might be.
How does your Audacity waveform look like? Does it still look like you're getting good volume there?
Oh yeah, it is quieter.
So maybe your gain got reset. If you look next to the microphone, there's a little slider. There's a microphone icon that says your recording volume, and it's a little slider, and it's your recording gain.
In Audacity?
What's that? In Audacity. If you change it in Audacity, it'll change it for Skype. Like they're all tied together. It's part of the hardware gain driver setting.
Okay, how about now?
Yeah, it's better.
Yeah, it's getting better. So just put that up until the waveform looks reasonable.
Well, now it's on full.
Okay.
Okay. As long as it doesn't look like it's clipping in Audacity, then that should
No,
be
it's
good.
actually, it doesn't even go to 0.5.
Okay, that's fine.
At all. Okay,
Yeah,
I hope it doesn't crash again then.
Okay, let's do that again. Okay, so Miro, we got a couple of news articles to discuss. Feel free to comment on any of these. Then we'll start talking more about the talk you'll be giving at CppCon, okay?
Yep.
Okay, so this first one is reacting to Dropbox, another take on cross-platform C++ development. So we did mention this Dropbox article, I think it was maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. Jason, do you remember when that first came out?
It might have been about 4 weeks ago. And then we got we were trying to remember the burrito method.
Yeah, and
method. And then Adi corrected us, and yeah, right.
Right. So Dropbox, unfortunately, is dropping their C++ support in favor of just doing, the native platform language, not Java, but Kotlin and Swift. And this article is from Tanker, which I don't think I had heard of before, but they're talking about the way they do C++ cross-platform development, which does include mobile, and they've been successful with it. Are you familiar with Tanker, Jason? Before reading this article? Yeah, so it sounds like they do an encryption SDK. So it is a little different compared to Dropbox, where they're making the whole, mobile app. It looks like Tanker provides an end-to-end encryption SDK, which can be used by other mobile apps and I think also, non-mobile platforms as well.
Right.
But they talked through some of the obstacles they've seen, but they also just kind of rebutted a bunch of the things said in the Dropbox article, like, kind of talking about how Dropbox felt there wasn't a good C++ open source library ecosystem, which I think we both disagreed with when we first read the article, and they kind of highlighted it with some data showing the number of active repos in C++ and how it's been going up really steadily since 2013 when Dropbox first started their C++ effort.
Yeah, actually.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I was actually a maintainer of Genie, the cross-platform generator for a while. Yeah. So I was on the same boat. I had a work where we created the 3D engine, and it was supposed to run on both iOS and Android. My colleague Jakob, who I gave a talk with last year at Meeting CPP, he's an Android user. I used to have an iPhone, so cross-platform API and usage was a big deal for us. So we looked at Genie, and somehow I got involved. Rewrote half the thing. For some reason, they accepted the pull request. I don't know why. But then I became a maintainer for about 2 years until I left the project. Yeah. So I can totally understand their stance, though, because we had the exact same problem. One of the teams were about to start a new application, and so we convinced them to also use C++ for their cross-platform code. And getting mobile developers to use C++, it's difficult. If they're only familiar with Objective-C and Java, then it's a challenge.
Yeah.
And as far as I know, the project, they stopped using it again because the people there just don't want to use C++. And it's also hard to find or hire mobile developers who are willing to learn and dive into C++. So I can totally understand why they made this decision.
I guess one of the things that made me think about with this article was, they're talking about how they have this SDK or library that they make cross-platform with C++. And maybe Dropbox could have had a little more success if they treated it that way, like kind of isolated the main Dropbox code, which is doing lots of file I/O and network I/O, I'd imagine, and put that in a shared C++ library, but then the rest of the code, other business logic and GUI stuff could be done in the native language. It seems like that might be a better approach, and you could still use something like Genie to make your platform bindings.
I mean, that's how we used it, right? So the platform teams all wrote the UI in the native frameworks, and the shared business logic was written in C++, and our 3D engine, which of course doesn't have any UI to it, so that was a lot easier. Mm. But one difficulty we had was that Genie generates shared pointers for its C++ interfaces everywhere, and if you're not careful with that, you end up with your entire business logic being littered with shared pointers, and that's one of the things that really, I think, created the problem of not wanting to deal with C++ by the mobile developers, because the shared pointers just polluted everything.
Well, that's basically the world they live in with, Java anyhow, right?
It is, right, but it's not, they don't see it. It's not in the language.
Okay.
Right, so Objective-C with automatic reference counting, you just use normal pointers, and you don't see all of this.
Right. So this article says that they exposed their API as a thin C interface, and they say this is what Adi described in his salami method article. And then that just makes it easier because JNI and all those things, they like talking to C anyhow. Yeah. And any code that I've done that needed to be cross-language, cross-platform exposure, I did use Swig to generate C++ bindings. I was just wondering if either of you had experience with trying to do this thin C API exposure of your library, or if you did expose C++. Sounds like you exposed C++ because you're talking smart pointers.
Yeah, I mean, in this project, Genie, it was all smart pointers, but a long time ago, I once created a .NET wrapper for C++ library, and that was mostly exposed through a C interface, and then with C++ CLI on the other side, talking to both sides to the C API.
I just feel like, I mean, I don't know because I've never done it, that there would be unless it was a super, super high level interface, there would be a lot of create object, destroy object kind of things going
Correct.
on, which sounds so painful.
Yeah. I mean, on the Java side, you have to hook into the garbage collector to know when all the references are gone and then destroy the object. If there are no C++ references to the shared pointer. So, yeah, it's difficult. And you have to fumble around with weak pointers and weak references that aren't really exposed in the Java language, right? It's just library types. It's not easy. And on the C++ side, you have the downside that Genie would generate abstract base classes for you. Then you had to implement. And that's how you exposed your functionality. And then that forced the whole shared pointer and virtual stuff on you.
Right.
Yeah.
So as a former Ginny maintainer, do you still think, if you are going to try to do this in mobile with shared C++, is it still a good option? It sounds like Dropbox probably won't be investing any more time in it.
Yeah. I don't think I would go that way again because those shared pointers, they make, I understand why they did it because, for the cross-platform reference counting, garbage collection stuff, but I think going the C way is probably better because they also tried to create a Python integration, which I don't think ever actually came out of alpha or was ever released. And I think languages are just better at dealing with C interfaces. So I think on both sides of the C barrier, there's just more tools to deal with it. That's my assumption, at least.
Right.
Okay. So we also have some articles from CppCon, since it is going to be next week. The first one is that Tooltime is back. Did they not have it last year, Tooltime, Jason?
They did.
I missed okay.
It, but they did have it, yeah. So it's back for the second year, I believe, is the point of this, yes.
Yeah, so if you're not familiar with Tooltime, they're going to have a 90-minute session on Tuesday evening that is open to anyone that wants to talk tools. And I think, several vendors will be there. There'll probably be people from JetBrains and Visual Studio to help people out if they have any questions about their tools. That's kind of the point of this session, right, Jason?
Yeah, well, it's, for people to demo and to expose and then, make their tools known and whatever, yeah. And obviously you can ask questions of the people working on them.
Right.
And Peter Bindles is the host of Tooltime this year. Last year it was Phil, I believe.
Oh, okay. And then the other thing is that they are calling for open content sessions. So open content sessions are things that aren't on the schedule or don't have to be, pre-booked. You can have a birds of the feather talk and kind of just propose it while you're at the conference. I think there are a couple that are already on the schedule though, right, Jason?
There might be. I was having a hard time telling. It looks like there's a couple over one of the lunch sessions at least.
Right. But if there's something you wanted to talk about, you could propose it even while you're at the conference, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. So these are things before the regular session starts, over lunch, after the regular session starts or ends.
And you gave one of these a few years ago, right, Jason?
Yeah, I think the first year that they did it, I gave one on ChaiScript, which was actually, I think it was my first year at CppCon.
Oh, okay.
It was a long time ago. Yeah. But, they're open to everyone. Whether or not you register to the conference, you can submit one of these and come to one.
Yes. And then the last thing we have is from Meeting C++, highlighting the student and support tickets for Meeting C++ 2019. And yeah, they've been doing a pretty good student and support program. Looks like they're offering 50 free tickets to Meeting C++ if you're interested in being a student volunteer, or if you just can't afford to buy a ticket and need some financial support, or if you're kind of in an underrepresented group, then you might be able to get a free ticket, which is pretty cool.
And are you speaking there this year, Miro?
No, unfortunately, I didn't get accepted.
Okay. That's much closer to you than coming to CppCon.
Yes. Tiny bit, yeah.
Tiny bit. Is there a direct route from Munich to Berlin, or do you have to do?
Yes, there's a 5-hour train ride.
I spend so much time in airplanes. Whenever I get the chance, I take the train. I've even done it in the U.S. now.
It's just
It
a
is
lot
thing.
easier.
Yeah. And more comfortable. You can get up and walk around whenever you want to. There's
Yes,
not,
yes.
food carts going down the thing. You don't get the feeling of claustrophobia that you
Of
can
course,
get on
most
an airplane.
importantly, you get free Wi-Fi, you get a power
Ah,
socket, you get all the
and
good
even if you
stuff.
don't have free Wi-Fi, your 4G probably works on most of the route anyhow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Miro, speaking of CppCon, you will be there next week,
I will, yes.
and your talk is Non-Conforming C++, The Secrets the Committee is Hiding from You. And that talk title definitely grabbed my attention when I saw it. Can you tell us a little bit more about the premise of the talk?
Yeah, the clickbait worked. Well, first of all, I have to say that, you have had committee members on the show before, so I just have to assume that this show is compromised, and I have to be very careful about what I say, right?
Okay.
Because that I've already received death threats by the committee just for announcing my talk. So yeah. Yeah, I mean, what it's about in general is that free-thinking C++ programmers in the past have added features to compilers that the committee is just hiding from us. They are not willing to put those in the standard. They are classified. You're not supposed to know about them. Yeah. And I'm going to reveal some of these secrets. On Wednesday at 15:15 in Summit 8/9. The revelation will happen there.
Wednesday at 50. Oh, I'm not giving a talk on Wednesday. That's
Mhm.
I might be able to attend.
Yeah, you should. You should learn about those secrets. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you gave us the clickbait version of the title.
hmm
Well, I guess however we want to flip this around, but how did you first become exposed to these non-standard extensions to language? How did you get interested in them?
I mean, I kind of always knew that some existed. I mean, the first C++ compiler I used was Visual Studio, and they have extensions all over the place. I
Several.
mean, just when I learned assembly. It's basically on my train ride from school to home, and that's how I learned about the DecoSpec thing and with the naked. So I wrote my entire function sometimes in assembly, back where you could actually still outperform the compiler. Those days I think are gone now.
Mhm.
But yeah, so DecoSpec did a lot of things, and then you can create even properties on the Microsoft compiler with DecoSpec. You can do all kinds of things. So there's attributes, but then you have also syntax changes like unnamed structures, or GCC has things like statements in expressions. Then of course there are things that just were extensions to C originally, but then were added to C++, or you can use them in C++ at least, like variable length arrays, flexible array members, things like that, right? So they extend the syntax and the semantics of the language so that you can do extra things. So in my talk, I'm going to show a few of them that are that some of them are really minor. They're only like quality of life improvements or things that make it less likely to create bugs and mistakes. But then there are also some that appear very small on the surface, but then when you dig into it, you realize that they can do things that standard C++ just doesn't let you do without dancing in an undefined behavior minefield. And the minefield never ends. So yeah, and then I'm going to show one that has everyone's favorite language keyword, goto.
Hmm.
And with that, I will demonstrate how you can speed up certain classes of programs by up to 20%.
Just
And
sprinkle in a few go-tos around.
yeah, magic gotos, not normal gotos.
I had no
Yeah,
idea
so
there were magic go-tos in the language.
there are. Well, if you believe the committee, then no, but well.
So as some of these things, I mean, you mentioned Visual Studio, and let's be fair, like non-const reference to temporary. It's just been a thorn in my side for years from Visual Studio. On one hand, it's an extension. On the other hand, I just think of it as a bug. And where do you draw the line between an extension and a bug?
I mean, I draw the distinction. I mean, those things, the things I will show have clear intent, right? They're not something like the constref. They're not like accidental or something that you say, well, this could also be a bug. No, they are deliberate additions to the language to achieve a certain goal that you cannot achieve otherwise.
Okay.
So speaking more on Visual Studio, I know C++ CLI is an extension I'm fairly familiar with, and that's something that I know is very Windows focused. It's so they can talk to the .NET framework. Are there any other extensions that like multiple compilers have similar implementations of extensions, or are they pretty much all like isolated to a single compiler?
So there aren't a lot that are shared by GCC and Microsoft and Clang.
Okay.
I think of the ones that I'm going to show, there's only two. But Clang is trying very hard to be compatible with GCC, and so is the Intel compiler. So a lot of the extensions that GCC has are also supported on those.
Okay.
So they're almost driving like a de facto standard for the expected extensions.
Yeah, pretty much. There are some quirks, but I think those are just bugs that, they're not implementing it fully to the extent that they should. Like on Clang, you sometimes have to put a 0 in the array, and actually in GCC you don't have to, like those minor things, but they behave more or less the same.
So
yeah.
A non-standard extension to the language that multiple compilers happen to implement, if they have different behavior, do you submit a bug report to the compiler? Hey, your non-standard, poorly documented feature doesn't behave the same as GCC's non-standard. I mean, how does that work?
I guess you can try. I don't know how they're going to react because these extensions are also pretty old, right? So GCC's one, I think they're all even from the 90s, so before C++ was standardized.
Oh, wow.
Then a lot of them were written against C99. So they're not even C++ targeted, but they are available in C++. So then you have this question, how does it interact with the C++ object model and stuff and lifetimes and all of that. But yeah, if one compiler doesn't behave the same as another, then maybe you're just out of luck, or you have to convince one of them to change. Maybe they would agree that it's a bug and that, Clang, I think, they are attempting to be feature compatible with GCC, right? It starts with a command line that's pretty much the same. Then they have all these extensions. I mean, someone had to go and implement them just because GCC has them, right? So I think that they have a vested interest in making the code the same, because at some point they also want to compile the Linux kernel, and that's using all kinds of extensions too, as far as I know.
Yeah.
So I think it's in their best interest to match it. And of course, Intel, they probably don't want to screw this up either. So they want people to use the compiler. So if I have GCC code that's using these extensions and they claim to implement these extensions and then it doesn't behave the way it does on GCC, then they probably have an interest in fixing that.
That's a good point.
That's my take on it. I don't actually know the answer, but yeah, that makes sense to me.
It does make sense, yeah. They are, I mean, like you pointed out, both Intel and Clang are trying to be drop-in replacements for GCC. They want to convince you to use their product, and that's the best way to do it.
Correct, yeah. And one of those companies asks you for money, so...
Right. They have an even stronger interest, yeah.
Yes.
You mentioned that a lot of these extensions, or some of them, predate the standardization of the language. Are there less extensions being made now that C++ is being iterated on a much more rapid clip?
I don't think so. Like, I think that with the increased conformance hype since C++ 11, I don't think that there's a lot of effort being put into creating extensions that aren't already on the path to becoming a feature in the standard.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at all the compilers, right, Microsoft rewrote the entire front end to be compatible with C++ 11. Well, 98 too, I guess, technically, but there's a lot of effort being put into conformance. And in the past years, the only extensions that I've seen are the ones written by proposal authors to show have a proof of concept for their
before
papers.
it's standardized. Yeah.
Yeah,
Microsoft also made a library to replace one of their extensions.
Which one? I don't know what that's.
The C++ CX. We had Kenny Kerr on talking about that.
To replace the CLI, basically.
Not CLI, but CX for
sorry.
more modern Windows. Yeah.
I cannot keep track of them. Yeah. I've never used any of them, the CLI, CX, or Kenny's library.
I did use CLI, but I never used CX.
A lot of people. Only a few people have, probably.
So, I mean, one thing you mentioned a couple times now is a magic go-to. And if you want to, you can just leave that hanging so people come to your talk. But I am curious, particularly with something like a magic go-to, are you willing to put this into production code?
If it was my own product and I could very clearly measure the difference, then probably. But
Okay.
I don't think I would put it like in an open source library or something without some compiler if-defs around it. Because it is still an extension and people are assuming that the code you write is standard conforming. But in that case, I will probably provide a switch and say, hey, if you're using a compiler that has this support for this and you care about the performance of this particular part, you can put on this switch and use this extension. And I mean, which software engineer wouldn't say yes to a 13% speed up?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you could really document that, that would be.
Yeah.
So in general, do you find that many of these extensions that you're going to talk about are things that can be isolated, switched off, whatever? They're not going to become a fundamental nature part of how you wrote the program?
No, I think the magical go-to has that is something you would use for a very specific use case.
Okay. Then
the other extension is also for a very particular use case, but it is, well, yeah, there's a bit more to that, but it's useful. But you can isolate these things. You can make it just in one function or in one class.
Okay.
Though the thing I mentioned about undefined behavior minefields, they come back when you switch off the extension. And one of the features I will present, I'm convinced that you cannot implement the same thing as efficiently in standard C++. And I will show the path from the start of implementation all the way to the end where I give up.
That would make an interesting challenge if you leave your talk saying, this is the code sample. I do not believe it is possible to do it as efficiently, and see if anyone comes back in a couple of weeks or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I gave this talk to my local meetup, and they already found more undefined behavior in my slides than I knew about. So it's like, it never ends. Just undefined behavior, one after the other. You think you fixed one, but you created two new.
And this is the version that doesn't use the magic go-to?
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
this isn't about the go-to. This one is a different feature. But yeah, the magical go-to, that's just making something that already works faster. Right. But the other thing that's making something possible, it is impossible right now, I believe.
Huh.
Are you willing to tell us a little bit more about what that other feature is?
Well, flexible array members. Do you know what that is?
No, I don't think so.
No.
Well, then come to my talk. Don't look it up. Don't cheat.
Don't cheat. No, I won't cheat. The closest I'm aware of is the dynamically sized arrays from C99.
Yeah, you mean the stack arrays with a runtime integer, runtime size?
Right, yeah. Runtime size. Although I just read a comment saying that those are like, that it seems to be that people agreed that it was a bad idea, and they don't actually get used a lot in C because they end up with undefined behavior and stuff happening in them, but I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I interrupted.
No, sorry, go ahead.
So that was one of the features I actually wanted to present, but then I just ran some benchmark on Compiler Explorer and stuff, and if you just use a boost static vector, it's generating the exactly same code. And you don't run into this problem of blowing your stack unless you put a very, very big constant on that container.
Well, there you go then.
Yeah.
So we already kind of mentioned that some of these extensions might be things that are being worked on for the committees, right? I mean, like just hypothetically, like concepts implemented as an extension to GCC years and years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are any of the things that you've come across or that you're talking about are things that were at one time considered as extensions, or maybe perhaps things that you think will become later into the language, perhaps? I mean, not extensions, but official. Yeah.
I don't think so.
Okay.
But it's also difficult to find out because a lot of the things are on the internal committee reflectors. I mean, some of them were added to C, so one then might ask, why not in C++ too?
Right.
But I'm not actually sure. It's also a bit difficult to find the history of these extensions because they go so far back.
Okay, at some point after this talk, I'm expecting you to submit a proposal to the committee to standardize the magic goto, because we need more gotos in our code usage.
I mean, this magic goto is also one very, very magical aspect, and that is foot guns are pretty much toys compared to this. You can supernova the solar system if you screw up with this.
Okay. So it's possible to avoid... Oh, sorry, Rob.
I was just going to say, it's probably not going to be standardized then.
Probably not.
Well, you never know.
I mean, if you count the amount of undefined behavior we have already, I mean, what's one more, right?
Yeah,
sure.
So you are talking about things that don't have to involve undefined behavior and can have a real significant impact in your project.
Yes.
Sounds interesting.
I mean, right, the undefined behavior comes from the fact that the compiler knows what you're trying to do. Except in the other case where you're just trying to do some random pointer arithmetics and then you realize that the abstract machine doesn't like that. That's like, yeah, that's where a lot of the undefined behavior comes from, that people are just, they think they're programming the CPU, they think they understand how the hardware works, but in reality you are writing instructions for the abstract machine of C++, and the compiler reads your code as instructions for the abstract machine.
Right.
And then things that you think should make sense and should work just don't, because the compiler is a barrier in front of the hardware. And that's why, so one of these extensions was created just for this one purpose, because even in C you have these object models and abstract machine that you have to cope with.
I don't think I realized that in C you also were technically programming the abstract machine. I never stopped to think about it.
Yeah, and C also has a lifetime and object models.
Right.
And they're different to C++, which makes it makes it very... You think you can just include a C header and it just works, but it might not. It might be full of undefined behavior because you're including a source file of a different language that has different rules.
And this is why I always advocate that our C++ header file should be HPP instead of .h, so that we know what language we are actually working with.
I fully agree with that. All my files are CPP and HPP.
You're only one of like 5 people that I've ever talked to that fully agree with me on that. But I push for it.
Yeah.
Just for the record. I'm sorry. I keep interrupting you.
No, I was done. Sorry.
The C++ core guidelines, for anyone who cares, actually specifically say to use .h for our header file extensions because it is the de facto industry standard or something like that. And I fully disagree with that.
I'm with you on that too. Yeah.
Now we just have to sort out which side we put const on, and we'll all be on the same page.
So in your bio, you said you currently work as a freelancer and trainer. When you're doing some training, are you trying to encourage the use of some of these extensions, or are you keeping it to conform in C++?
I stick to the conformant parts, yeah.
Now, I know how training goes, though. Every now and then, your students ask you a question, and you have to be like, okay, well, technically, you could use this extension, right? Like, it has to come up every now and then.
Yes, the word technically is one of those words that when you use it, then people already know, so there's a but.
Yeah. I semi-regularly will have students say something, well, oh, so that's impossible in C++? And I have to go, no, it's C++. Nothing is impossible.
If you have a compiler that doesn't turn all undefined behavior into mush.
Even removing undefined behavior, there's probably some way to do whatever they were asking for. But if you allow undefined behavior, oh yes. Let's go ahead and rewrite the V table so that we're calling different functions. I mean, it's technically possible to do these things.
Mm-hmm. And the compiler is technically allowed to just punch you in the face when you do it.
So on the topic of the compiler punching you in the face, I am a big fan of using wpedantic warnings, which I'm guessing if you're using these non-conformant extensions, wpedantic, I mean, that's the specific reason that warning exists, right? Is to tell you you're doing something that's not standard.
For many of these things, you don't even need them. Clang flags them automatically. It says that it's on C99 extension.
Okay.
So for many of these, you don't need any extra flags to find them.
Now, you already said that if this were like a publicly visible product, you wouldn't do this. But if it was like some private project you're working on or whatever, and you said, I'm going to flip on this 30% savings here, would you put pragmas around that code so that it doesn't generate a warning with wpedantic? Or would you leave that noise there so that people who are compiling in that mode are like, oh, okay, yeah, right, I know that this code is off in a gray area already?
That's a good question. I mean, if I was alone, I would turn it off because it's noise and I want to see the real warnings that I care about, which is everything minus a blacklist. But
all the warnings except for the ones you don't care about.
Yeah. But otherwise, I would probably put this pragma around some preprocessor stuff so that it doesn't fire on compilers I know support this. And then maybe have an alternate implementation if that's possible. That's conforming. But then, right, so yeah, for example, using the Microsoft compiler, which doesn't have this magic go-to, but then you could also just, for example, for this one file, you could use Clang CL, and then it's going to generate an object file that's compatible with all the Microsoft generated stuff, and then you can use the Microsoft toolchain for everything else. So that's something you could do if you, for some reason, you have to use the Microsoft toolchain. But yeah, for my own project that isn't public or that I don't intend to give support to, even if it is on GitHub, I would probably use it if it's worth the savings I get from it.
Okay. I'm sorry, but when you said, oh, I could just compile that one file with Clang CL on Windows, like, I don't think I've ever heard anyone advocate, oh, well, I'm just going to pick and choose a couple of files here. I'll compile with one compiler. Technically should be fine. They're ABI compatible, using the same standard library implementation, whatever. But it just sounds risky to me.
It probably is risky, yeah. I mean,
okay.
But on the other hand, the LLVM folks try it to be as compatible with the Microsoft compiler as possible, so you can use it as a drop-in replacement. You can still use the standard Microsoft linker for everything. You don't have to use LD. So the object format that is spit out of this is the same, but then of course, all the macros and all the sizes and alignments and layouts and stuff, you better hope it's the same too.
Be fascinating if they did some sort of like fuzzing project where they would choose a random selection of files in a project to compile with each compiler and then see if all the tests still pass and then try again with a different random selection.
That's a good idea. Maybe they should do that.
Compiler fuzzing.
Yeah.
Did we break the ABI today?
Right.
Yeah.
do we have anything else to go over? Is there anything else you want to talk about, Miro?
I mean, only the standard is a lie. Don't trust the committee, and come to my talk.
Okay.
Okay. Well, it's been great having you on the show today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure.